Scream 7 is the worst movie in the Scream franchise ever since Scream 6, which was the worst movie in the Scream franchise ever since Scream 5, which is probably still one of the worst movies in the Scream franchise, if not the worst movie in the Scream franchise. But I think it is finally time for us over here on the Actual Justice Warrior channel to wrap up this trilogy, as I have reviewed a part 1, 2, and now 3 in this particular video, especially since the folks over on Reddit did not like my first review of the first movie in the Radio Silence trilogy, Scream 5, despite the fact that all their dumbass Reddit comments didn't address any of the criticisms that I actually had. So we're going to talk about this. We are going to break this down. But before we do, I want to thank everybody who supports this channel via actualjusticewarrior.com/join.
Give me the money. Give me the money. Okay?
This is it.
Can't believe we're staying at the Psycho Killer B&B.
Oh.
So if you guys don't know, Scream, the 1996 release from Wes Craven, is one of my favorite movies of all time, and it's an absolute masterpiece, and you 100% should watch it, because this is a movie where Wes Craven essentially took Hollywood to task for dumbing down Freddy Krueger from the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise, which Wes Craven also already created, while simultaneously attacking the slasher genre, which again had been put through the ringer due to Hollywood's endless desire for sequels, while also making a slasher movie for the ages that is one of the best in the entire genre. It is truly a magical moment, and it's absolutely wonderful in every possible way, but unfortunately, much in the same way that after The Dark Knight came out and was a big hit, every single superhero ended up going through this dark, gritty reboot, even though it wasn't suited for them. We end up in a scenario where Scream has eventually become exactly what it was meant to fight against, and now, rather than attacking Hollywood, or those who actually have power over our entertainment and over our society, they're basically doing a Star Wars, and they're attacking the fandom for supposedly being toxic, even though, again, the new people behind this trilogy, this new trilogy, don't even understand the point of the film. And to give you an example of what I'm talking about, there's a scene in the first Scream movie where you have Sidney Prescott, our lead hero, who, by the way, Neve Campbell, still beautiful to this very day, where she's on the phone with the killer, and she says something like she doesn't like horror movies because you have a bunch of dumb broads that are running up the stairs rather than out the front door.
Favorite scary movie?
Oh, come on, you know I don't watch that shit.
Why not? Too scared?
No, it's just what's the point? They're all the same. Some stupid killer stalking some big-breasted girl who can't act, who's always running up the stairs when she should be going out the front door. It's insulting.
Only to be attacked by the killer in this very scene, go for the front door, which is what her instincts tell us she's about to do, but realize that she actually locked the chain lock, and thus making that not a viable option, and then going up the stairs. Now, to the layman, to the person who doesn't understand the craft in this first Scream movie, you might be thinking that that is them acknowledging a trope and then doing it, but in reality, it's them showing us through filmmaking and craft a practical reason why she's going to end up going up the stairs. It sets up a comedic bit, and again, it gives you an idea, a distillation of the tone of this movie. Because remember, it's not the trope itself that's bad. What's bad is when dumb things in a movie happen without justification or proper setup. Because we have the scene of her going outside to check for the killer, then coming back in after she's terrified, and then we see her lock that chain lock, that sets up for her to not be able to get out of the door quick enough, and then end up going up the stairs. But occasionally, this is going to lead them down the wrong path, because the killer, or killers, depending on if you want any spoilers, are just as aware of these tropes, and in fact, are making their own movie as well, based on their study of horror movies. Oh, and by the way, this is your warning, I will be spoiling all the movies throughout the whole course of this particular video. Again, it's a very intelligent scene that is told to us and shown to us in a very quick way. If you blink, you might miss it, or if you're the Radio Silence people that are behind the new trilogy, you might miss the entire point of the scene, and you might think to yourself that the whole point of the Scream franchise is to say the stupid ass trope and then immediately do everything in the trope and make a terrible movie 3 times in a row. Again, Scream is an absolutely amazing movie. By the way, they set the tone in that movie with with one of the most iconic kills of all time, which is the very famous Drew Barrymore, who was originally cast as the lead of the film because she was very famous, but after reading the script, she said that she needed to be killed first because people needed to understand that anything could happen in these movies, even though, again, in the sequel trilogy, that is exactly what people do not understand, because no, absolutely not, anything can't happen in those movies, because they always bend the knee to the modern rules, the modern woke rules many of the times, and it's absolutely embarrassing, but more on that a bit later. We need to do some more groundwork, because after Scream, we actually have Scream 2. Now, Scream 2 obviously is in part a parody of a sequel. They end up mocking the fact that the killer in that movie, one of them, is motivated by the fact that he wants movie censorship. He wants to say that the movies led him to do this. He wants to become famous like O.J. Simpson through a great criminal trial and whatnot. But again, we also, just like in the first movie, have a personal motivation for another killer. But in this particular movie, we also got something else, which is the Stab franchise, which is the in-universe movies that are based on the events that are actually taking place in the movies that we're watching. And we actually see the Stab movies, scenes of them, throughout the course of the second Scream movie. And what we notice, it's incredibly dumbed down. And the reason for this is because Wes Craven's chief thing that he wanted to go after was, again, Hollywood, that is now making him make this sequel, but he wants to make sure people understand that he never wants the Scream movies to turn into those Stab movies. The Stab movies are meant to be a parody of where this franchise could go, the dumbed down version of it, and this is what he's trying to avoid. And then we jump to the third Scream movie, which of course ended up having a bunch of restrictions, both censorship and all sorts of other issues that makes that movie not really work. But again, because a common theme of the Scream movies is that Hollywood is the enemy, because remember, they turned Wes Craven's nightmare monster of Freddy Krueger into a jokey catchphrase kind of guy that, again, has none of the original horror that was originally associated with him. In this particular movie, they ended up having a studio head in Hollywood that actually assaulted Sidney Prescott's mom. She had her first child, who turns out to be the killer in this particular movie, and that guy is also a secondary villain that's not a killer in this particular film. And one of the things that's interesting is that Scream is produced by Miramax. The heads of Miramax were the Weinstein brothers. So you guys can draw whatever conclusions you want from that inclusion in the movie as revenge for the censorship that was hoisted upon this particular film. Now, of course, after this trilogy, it was done for a while. But of course, Hollywood has this trend where they want to reboot old franchises for nostalgia. And this brings us to one of my favorite movies in the franchise, Scream 4, where we actually have the villain in this movie, who, spoiler alert, is Sidney Prescott's cousin in this particular movie, played by Emma Roberts, who is trying to reboot the franchise, bring back some of the old characters for nostalgia purposes, while transitioning to the new cast. And again, this was a trend in Hollywood. Obviously, this is still a trend in Hollywood, because this movie is extraordinarily ahead of its time, and the villain, again, is this Hollywood trope, this Hollywood stereotype, which is bring back the old cast for nostalgia purposes, and then have the new cast, which are younger versions of the old cast, take over the franchise so you could project it forward into the future. Again, this movie also had a lot of commentary related to influencers, related to the idea that the way you become famous now is by making yourself into a victim, all sorts of other things that strike at the core of Hollywood, in what is probably my favorite of the sequels. So for me, it would be Scream 1, Scream 4, Scream 2, and then Scream 3, and then the Radio Silence trilogy is absolutely objectively garbage, which brought us, of course, to Scream 5, which decided to basically make the exact movie that Scream 4 was making fun of, where you bring back the old cast, you do the Star Wars Force Awakens treatment, where you're rebooting the old storyline, but there's nothing intelligent about it or anything of the sort. And instead of the villains being Hollywood itself, the real villains are actually the fans. Preemptively, they decided to attack the fans in this movie, and by the way, they did it in the least subtle way humanly possible, because the Stab movies, which again were never meant to be anything of value. They were Hollywood trash through and through, a warning of what the Scream franchise could become. They actually angered the super fans. They were mad because the 8th Stab movie was directed by the same guy who did Knives Out, Rian Johnson, who happened to direct the 8th movie in the Star Wars franchise. Do you guys see where this is going? So they decided to create new source material to restore the Stab franchise back to prominence, even though, again, the Stab franchise was always considered to be a trash parallel version of the story once it got into the hands of the Hollywood executives that the movies were fighting against the whole time. But now they're actually the focus of this, and toxic fandom is the issue. Hollywood is the good guy, and again, they are unironically doing the reboot of the movie that's overloaded with nostalgia, that has the more diverse minority cast where all the minorities are basically invincible and the white people either get killed, and by the way, killed brutally, which is something that is specifically made fun of in the trailer for Scream 4, that they have to amp up the violence in order to get people's attention.
And the kill's gotta be way more extreme.
And this slop, this trash, was accepted by huge portions of the fan base, including people in that Reddit thread who thought that I was somehow the actual fan that they were commenting on, even though, again, I'm just somebody who understood the point of the movies. I'm not like heartbroken over it because I didn't expect these sequels to be good, but I just find them to be embarrassing in every possible way. I mean, they even Han Solo Dewey in that they made him a mentor to the new cast, only to kill him off in a stupid ass way. And of course, they did the worst decision humanly possible, where they decided to make Melissa Barrera's character the bastard daughter of Billy Loomis, and actually see ghost projections of Billy Loomis to imply that maybe she has genetic predisposition to being a killer, even though, again, Billy Loomis is the one with the personal motivation, because Sidney Prescott's mom hooked up with his dad, breaking up his family, and that's why he wanted revenge on Sidney. Now, again, I know some people will say, no, Scream 4 is actually not good, and you're absolutely wrong, and one of the things that really shows how ahead of its time this 2011 movie actually was, is the fact that in their new modern rules for horror movies, they actually predict that being in a marginalized group is the only way for you to be safe in said movie.
Modern audiences get savvy to the rules of the originals, so the reversals become the new standard. In fact, the only surefire way to survive a modern horror movie, you pretty much have to be gay.
The Radio Silence trilogy has absolutely nothing on this, and if you think I'm wrong, please show me the scene in there where they mock the diversity casting that they force into the new movies in order to, again, appeal to these same modern audiences. They don't have that because, again, the new movies are about attacking the audience and defending Hollywood, while the old movies were about shining a light on the hypocrisy of Hollywood. Again, guys, I really need to emphasize this to you over and over again, that Scream 4 is essentially mocking the next 3 movies in the franchise 10 years before they come out, because they essentially predict every direction that this is going to go in, tie that to the villain, which is Sidney's cousin, while simultaneously making an engaging mystery. I mean, Scream 4 on a surface level is this idea that you're going to pass the movie from the older cast to the younger cast. The older cast is there for the nostalgia purposes, but if you actually watch the movie and you understand a point of view of particular scenes, one of the things that you realize is that Jill Roberts, the new Sidney Prescott, wink wink, actually is not the point of view of the story until she's revealed to be the villain, because the movie is actually not about passing the torch to the new cast or telling the point of view, which is the same exact story with the new cast. It's about telling the story of the villain. And again, unironically, the next movies, 5 and 6 and 7, are the movie that were being made fun of in Scream 4. With, of course, attacks on the fans for daring to notice it. So a franchise that used to mock horror movies, used to mock tropes, used to mock Hollywood, ended up becoming a franchise that defends Hollywood, that defends the tropes, that actually does the thing, but then they like wink at the camera and be like, haha, get it? We're saying that we're doing it, but we're still doing it, and that somehow makes it okay, which is one of the most pathetic, again, flattening flattening out of the movies, a la the Stab movies, a la becoming exactly what Wes Craven feared this franchise would become. And then we have the jump to Scream 6, where of course they refused to pay Neve Campbell the money that she was worth to appear in this franchise. The movie takes place, of course, in New York City because it's like, hey, Jason takes Manhattan, haha, even though this movie didn't really need to take place in New York City. And guess what? The family of the killer from the first movie, just like how Billy Loomis's mom is the villain in the second movie, want revenge for Richie because of the super fandom, and they're very upset, and now there's 3 killers. Are you guys impressed by the fact that there's 3 killers? And also, there's additional killers that wanted to be toxic fandom to recreate Richie's movie that are killed by the first killers. And wow, isn't this amazing? And also, every killer is white, like I pointed out when I reviewed the first movie, and you really can't even suspect any of the minority characters. Now, by the way, somebody might point out that every killer in the entire history of the franchise has been a white person, and yes, while that is in fact true, the fact is, when the cast was less diverse, or when you actually had a risk of non-white characters being killed in the movie, it wouldn't narrow down the suspects of the movie so much that the mystery is essentially given away, again, maybe like 25 minutes into the movie when a certain amount of characters have been killed off. So again, if you want to have minority characters in there, totally fine. Don't care about that. I mean, Scream 6 takes place in New York City. If you were going to have them anywhere, that would absolutely be it. But the point is, if they're invincible and also at the same time it can't be the killer and there's only a certain amount of characters in the movie, it makes the mystery worse. Again, if you say half your cast is non-white or also non-straight and none of those people can be the villains, and you're only killing people from the white half of your cast, and by the way, the straight white half of your cast, then by the time we get to the end of the movie, you realize that there's like 2 or 3 white characters in there that are new characters, and they're obviously the killer. Which means, once again, they are the exact same thing that Wes Craven warned about by inserting the Stab movies into Scream 2, where they're doing all the flat, boring Hollywood tropes, and only superficially, in a dumbed-down way, acknowledging points of the original. And one of the most ridiculous things about this is that they moved the setting of this movie to New York City, and they only utilized New York City in a decent way, maybe 1 or 2 times throughout the course of this particular film, but they still amp up the nostalgia. There are more Billy Loomis Force Ghost flashbacks in this particular film, and there's actually a point in time where the killers managed to get all of the original evidence from all the other crimes into a single nostalgia room, and we're supposed to be impressed by this in some way. And by the way, the previous movie, Scream 5, actually concludes in the house of Stu, which is where the first movie concludes, just to ramp up the nostalgia. So this is what the franchise is now. We have superficial, flattened out characters, again, following all of the Star Wars, Force Awakens, Jurassic World, and every modern movie trope where the old characters are brought in for nostalgia purposes. There's nothing intelligent in the commentary. They're attacking the fans for not accepting it, for not liking it, and this is where the franchise went. And much like in The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi, the third movie in that particular trilogy ends up being a backtrack. However, I will point out this was due to the fact that Melissa Barrera ended up being separated from the film due to commentary that she made about the Israel-Palestine stuff, and then Jenna Ortega dropped out of the film. So then they go back to Sidney Prescott and basically try to start the whole thing all over again. Now Sidney Prescott's daughter has a boy climbing in through her window, which is just like the original, just like Scream, nostalgia. And in this particular movie, the killers are people who were fans of Sidney Prescott and want her to go back to being original Sidney Prescott.
Tatum, listen to me. He's trying to find another way in. We're gonna do this together. You're gonna have to shoot him through the wall. Where? To the right of the door. Shoot him now! Do it now!
Like, I don't have much to say about Scream 7 because it's exactly what you would expect. It is the Force Awakens of the new trilogy, which again, basically followed the exact same trajectory of the Star Wars trilogy while simultaneously attacking the fans just like the Star Wars trilogy. I mean, you have basically a reset to Sidney Prescott. You end up having her daughter, which again is very similar to what they were making fun of in the Emma Roberts character in Scream 4. And yeah, there's nothing unique about this except now there's 3 killers. And of course, they're playing the nostalgia thing to the maximum by pandering to the fans who believe that Stu Macher survived the first Scream movie by having him appear, but it turns out to be AI. And once again, the killer is a super fan, like I said, of Sidney Prescott. Now, of course, they also have the brutality, the over-the-top brutality in the kills in this particular movie. And again, I will highlight, this is something that was made fun of expressly as a desperate ploy from people trying to remake the film in Scream 4, which just goes to show you that Scream 4 might have been the perfect movie for Wes Craven to end off his Scream franchise with. Now, I'll also point out that the same rules applied in this particular movie as all the other movies where the killer could not be a person of color. They had to be a white person. Obviously, one of the original rules for the Scream movies is that the killer can't be a returning or recurring character in the franchise. And this actress right here was actually cast as one of the people in the movie. So as soon as I saw her in like the first 10 minutes, I was like, oh yeah, she's definitely 100% one of the killers. And it turns out she's, again, a toxic fan of Sidney Prescott that wants to bring her back into the game because the toxic fans were upset about Sidney Prescott being cut out of Scream 6, and they have to criticize the fans for everything because remember, the fans are the problem. It's not Hollywood. It's not the desperate desire for yet another cash grab. It's people who like these movies, who enjoy them, and who have never once been described as toxic, so that's why you had to stretch and make the villains of the Scream movies Star Wars fandom. I mean, again, embarrassing in every possible way. Also, I do want to point out the brutality in this particular movie is also racially focused because once again, everybody who gets killed in this film is in fact a white person. Now, we start off with an Airbnb that is meant to look like Stu Macher's household. That's where the first kills from the trailer actually take place. And in that, you have brutal murder of the guy. The girl gets brutally attacked and then lit on fire, and then the house gets lit on fire. And yeah, that sets the tone right there for a series of brutal murders that seem to happen only to white characters. However, in this movie, one non-white character gets killed, but it's hilarious because she gets like slid across a bar table and a piece of glass actually breaks and goes into her neck, and presumably she's dead, but we don't actually know if she might recover. If there's a 9th movie or whatever, 8th movie in the franchise, she might come back a la Hayden Panettiere. But after that, we see the white kid get killed by having his head stuck onto a beer tap pike and then them opening the thing and beer shooting out, again, in the most brutal way. And considering one of the killers is the mother of that character, it's absurd. We also have the returning characters that are meant to be Jamie Kennedy's character's niece and nephew from the original films that are supposed to serve the same purpose, the half-black twins in this particular movie. And I had made a point about how they just get stabbed in the shoulder or stabbed in the stomach, but now the movie does that exact same thing where they have that happen and then survive yet again. But this time they say, oh, I don't want to get slashed in the stomach. And the other guy's like, I don't want to get stabbed in the shoulder because, again, the modern screenwriting is just them acknowledging a trope, winking at the camera, and then doing it because they don't understand the whole point of the franchise. Now, again, these new characters from the new trilogy are barely in the movie, so I don't want to criticize them too much. Also, they're barely characters. They're just stand-in substitutions, reminders that this is somehow tangentially related to the trilogy that started off with the bastard child of Billy Loomis seeing his ghost. The new main character of this movie and the new Sidney Prescott is actually Sidney Prescott's daughter, and yeah, there's not a lot there. There's not a lot to the character. I'm sure all of these people could be decent actors and actresses, but the fact is the characters are paper thin, and you still have Sidney being Sidney hanging around, and it's like either you're going to transition to the new people or you're not, but instead they want to have it both ways because, again, this is all about appealing to nostalgia. Like, there's a scene where for no reason, the killers make AI future aged up versions of the past killers to scare Sidney because, oh my god, look, we brought back all the killers from the movies. Remember the nostalgia factor? And it makes me realize what a masterpiece and ahead of its time the 4th movie in this franchise, Scream 4, actually is, because essentially everything that they put on the villains, everything that Hollywood was going to do if left unobstructed to this franchise has been done throughout the Radio Silence trilogy, and yeah, it's embarrassing in every possible way. So that was my review of not only Scream 7, the latest and not greatest movie in the franchise, but the whole thing as a whole, and I hope you guys appreciated it. I hope you guys got my high-minded analysis of this, and yeah, that's where I'm gonna leave it. Hopefully I don't end up on the Reddits this time with all these Redditors complaining, even though my points are completely bulletproof arguments, perfect 10 out of 10, and amazing in every possible way. Now, with all that being said, I want to say thank you to everybody who watched this video. As per usual, if you liked the video, show them by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on the social medias, support me via the support links in the description of this video. This has been me talking about Scream churning into slop. Till next time.